everybody, and welcome! There has been a lot of discussion lately about the state of Kerbal Space Program 2 since it was released as an early access game. To make it short, people are unhappy with the quality of what was delivered. And understandably so, because the game in its current state suffers from many problems, some of them even severely game-breaking, like vehicles exploding when you want to undock them. Today I want to take a look at what we can expect for maybe future updates and when these updates will come, and also what's further down the line. A few days before the early access release on February 24th, I had the chance to interview Creative Director Nate Simpson on the current situation and what we can expect for the future. I was contemplating whether or not I should even release it, because at the time of the interview I hadn't experienced the game for myself yet. So if you're missing questions from my side like, dude, why is the game so buggy? That's why. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in the talk we had that also gives us a hint at how much the developers were aware of the state of the game before the first public release. Since that release, Nate and the development team are busy making sure the next update addresses a lot of the community's complaints, so we didn't have time to talk in between. The interview was conducted over Zoom, the source footage was edited for brevity and clarity. What was already known at the time of recording was the minimum and recommended requirements for KSP2, which resulted in a huge uproar in the community. I did a video on that. If you like, you can watch it by clicking over here or via the link in the video description. That's where the conversation started. I asked Nate what went through his mind when he first saw the reaction within the community to the comparatively hefty minimum spec, and we expanded from there.
I think probably my biggest response when I see some people being unhappy with the current specs is keep in mind this will be improving over time, over the course of early access. Some people seem to be responding like, this is the spec forever. This is not the spec forever. This is the spec right now, and this will continue to improve.
Nate then went on to talk about the difficulty of setting minimum system requirements for a game like Kerbal Space Program 2, where the performance is impacted by the size and complexity of vehicles players like you and me build.
It's actually kind of an interesting and a slippery target, determining even how to measure like what min spec really is, because is the question, what is the number of parts you need to make a vehicle that can land on the mud? Is it some arbitrary number of parts? Is it 100? Like the one we often test with internally is a 150 part vessel, because we've determined that that's a pretty good sweet spot that lets you get creative with things. Yeah, there's a lot of variables to track, and it's often harder in this game than with a lot of games to determine, what the targets should be.
A lot of people have complained about the performance of the first early access build of KSP2, and even I, with quite a beefy system, struggled to get over 30 frames per second most of the time. But performance optimization was already on the developer's mind even before the feedback from the community came in.
There are some very low-hanging fruit around performance that we're continuing to pursue, so we'll be seeing a lot of improvement there over the coming months. It's obviously a relatively GPU-intensive game. I think a lot of that's probably going into PQS, our terrain system, which is currently going through a pretty deep optimization pass itself. When we're looking at benchmarking, there's quite a few things the game's doing simultaneously, and we're kind of just working down through like what is giving us the biggest frame rate hit today. All right, knock that off. Okay, what's the next biggest thing? And we're just sort of chewing through that list right now.
Let's circle back to the feedback part. While talking about other things, the topic of receiving feedback on the early access build came up again.
I'm not worried at all that we're not going to receive enough feedback.
Oh, you're going to
I think we'll be fine in that area.
But will you get qualified feedback? Actionable feedback, something you can actually use to improve the game? That's always the question, because, oh, it sucks is not valuable feedback.
We have very capable QA people who can turn, often, I supply them with that low quality feedback on my playthroughs, and they're very good divining the true source of a problem and turning that into language that is then parsable by our engineers.
I have read quite a few negative comments over the past week claiming that developers were delusional releasing the game in the current state. Watching back the footage from that interview and some other remarks Nate made, it is clear to me that they knew exactly in which state the game was in. This leads me to believe that the decision to release it at this point in time was not entirely up to them, but was heavily influenced by people on the business end of things. And yes, we all wonder when the first update with hopefully a lot of bug fixes and a few less Kraken will appear. Almost a week before the early access release of KSP2, this was what Nate had to say about that.
How often can players expect to get updates for their early access build? Are we talking weeks here? Are we talking months, quarter?
We're talking weeks.
Weeks, right.
As I said, we had our chat almost a week before the game launched, so from publication of this video, it might be just a week away or less until that first update is published. Might be, we don't know. But the patch coming within weeks line was also repeated by other people from within the development team or the publisher after the early access release. I have seen some people comment that weeks is too long and that they expect a patch within days after the release. Well, honestly, I hope they don't do daily releases. Here's why. Software development nowadays usually follows periodic cycles called sprints. These usually last 2 to 4 weeks. And everything around the development team, the delivery pipeline, the test systems, etc., everything is built around this time frame. This way a team can work at a steady pace, which makes everything much more predictable and will prevent errors. When I had access to the preview version of KSP2, the developers were updating the available build almost daily, so they are definitely capable of doing that. However, this might have been because the team was working full steam to meet the arbitrary deadline of February 24th, and might have contributed to some of the defects we currently see within the game. If you want software that works, you have to let the team work within the process they are familiar with, and where all the tools are geared towards the team's time frame. So yeah, weeks is fine for me.
Shadowzone from the future here. Between recording the talking head segment and the release of the video, Nate Simpson has published more details about the upcoming patch over on the KSP forums. There's already a long list of issues marked as fixed, meaning the developers have solved them. Among the fixes is this item. Engine plate floating node joints less rigid than other stack node joints were not receiving multi-joint reinforcement. What all of this technobabble means is, if you're building big rockets that require multiple engines per stage and use the engine plate, your rockets are more likely to wobble than if you use just one engine and one decoupler. Although that method has other problems right now. What this means is that the next patch will make rockets less wobbly than they are right now. Definitely something to look forward to. Nate also basically confirmed in a later entry what I said before this interruption about how development shouldn't be rushed. He went about it from a different direction, namely how everything that is checked into the next release has to be stable in such a way that nothing else gets broken, meaning not creating a new bug. Therefore, the team takes their time to make sure all the fixes they will provide with the next update are improving the game and not making it worse. I recommend you read up on everything Nate posted in that thread. Link to that is in the video description. Now, back to the interview. The next question was in part answered by Nate's forum post, but we don't have the final list of fixes yet. Those that have been announced are already guaranteed, but more will come if it is feasible for the team to do so.
Then there's also the question what will actually be the content of the upcoming patches. Back when I did the interview with Nate, we already knew that re-entry heating would not yet be included in KSP2. That's why my question focused on this and not on some of the game-breaking bugs we encountered after the release.
So when you say the re-entry heating and visuals are still being worked on, this is something that roughly people can expect coming to their systems sometime in March?
I am not in a position to guarantee the arrival of any particular feature with any particular update, partly out of respect for my own team. They're going to be looking through quite a nice big pile of to-do tasks in the coming weeks, and everything that comes into the game requires not working on some other part of the game.
Right.
We can't do all the things simultaneously. That's not how this works. So we'll take a look at sort of where we're at on day one. I would imagine performance is going to be an area of significant focus, and we'll balance all those other things against whatever that focus is.
Nate's answer shows that he was aware that the game's performance still needed tweaking. Unfortunately, many people say they cannot play the game in its current state due to how hard it is on their systems. If you remember from an earlier answer, there appear to be some low-hanging fruit that the team can leverage, and there's also, apparently, something they already intended to do with making the terrain system less demanding on players' computers before the early access release. And this leads me to another point, because it comes up a lot in, for instance, Reddit threads. People criticizing the developers for claiming they are having fun with the game. In our chat, Nate said that he plays the game all the time, sometimes multiple hours a day. Here's the thing, at time of recording, I have a bit more than a full day that I've been able to really play KSP2. And I have to admit, I've gotten used to working around some of the more egregious bugs. So somebody that is playing as often as Nate will even more so be able to work around all those issues and be able to enjoy the game. Sure, there's the occasional surprise where, for instance, my ship falls through the surface of Bob and then gets catapulted through the moon's core at ludicrous speeds on a course straight out of the Kerbal system. But I keep discovering things that I really like, aside from the stuff I mentioned in my good and bad things review of the first early access build. Again, link up top or in the description. One thing that pleasantly surprised me was the landing gear, finally, no longer behaves like freshly lubed skis on inclined terrain. Look at this! My Bob lander slides for a bit, yes, but then it stops and is stable on this steep slope. There has also been the question why only the tutorial seems to be really fleshed out while a lot of the rest of the game seems to be lacking. I believe this exchange I had with Nate can shed some light on that.
There are kind of four key pillars for KSP2. Three of which are coming in the future of early access, right? The interstellar, the multiplayer, and the colonies. But the first of them was the overhauled first-time user experience. That's really kind of the first of the big core pillars that people will be able to experience. And one of the things we're hoping to see, certainly something we've seen among the community in KSP1, is how seriously veteran players take their roles as stewards of the franchise or as teachers of new players, right? Like whenever someone new comes into the KSP subreddit, there's just this very warm, very welcoming, come on in, the water's fine. And now we are, I think, giving the community better tools to welcome new people into the KSP experience. So, and our earliest experiences with people who have not played KSP before are extremely encouraging. Teaching rocket science to new people is very, very hard. This is the area of the game that I think has seen the most iteration over the past few years. And it's been very, very heartening to see that it worked, that people are enjoying the process of learning how to play the game. And so we're hoping a lot of new people come in and kind of use this early phase as an opportunity to learn the ropes, figure out how to play the game, have some fun with it. But internally, as a veteran player myself, I have fallen pretty deeply in love with the KSP2 experience. And I'm going to be doing everything I can to communicate outward to the community where all the fun is, I actually don't think it's going to be that hard to communicate because I think people are going to start discovering things as they explore. It is a far richer set of environments to explore.
There's one thing I can agree on with Nate. Exploring in KSP2 is a joy when it works. And that when it works part is, I believe, the biggest issue right now stopping people from falling in love with the game the same way Nate apparently has. If you don't invest the time to learn the ropes, and in this case it's not learning rocket science but how to wrangle with bugs and Kraken attacks, this game will turn you off. It's exactly these new players Nate is talking about, the uninitiated, if you will, who will be scared away by all the negative reviews currently on Steam, and when their vehicles start to blow up without any discernible reason. And this is why I hope the next update will include many fixes for all the bugs that have been reported. I mean, I could do probably a half-hour video on just the things I alone found in the game and reported to the developers. Would a Shadowzone KSP2 bug reel be something you would be interested in? Let me know in the comments or over on my Discord server, link is in the description. But how are things going to be going forward? Let's assume for a moment that with the next update, more realistically with the next couple of updates, many of the game-breaking bugs and performance issues will be fixed. Then we can transition to the early access feedback proper, like focusing on the design choices the team made and how they implemented them. You can already get a glimpse of what this will be like when Nate and I talked about the new Parts Manager functionality. Keep in mind, when I asked the question, I hadn't played the game yet, so I only knew it from videos from creators who were at the ESA event. That's why I got a bit wrong in the beginning.
In KSP1 we had all these right-click menus and they were like all over the place. Now there appears to be this single part manager where all of this information is sort of living or has their home. Am I correct in understanding that there is no more really a right-click action, but everything is done via left-click over the part selector, or is there still right-clicking going on?
So you deploy the part, what we call the PAM, the Part Action Manager. You deploy that still by right-clicking on the part that you want to interact with. Currently, they're all deploying to a sort of single consolidated dialogue. I'm curious to hear people's reactions to that choice. The proximate justification for that was to allow the player to deploy a full list of all the things in their vehicle without having to hunt and peck on the vehicle. So there is a second way to deploy that information from the toolbar on the bottom of flight. I think there are some significant improvements likely to occur in that particular area going forward. And then in the end, I think we'll probably then look at that experience in the aggregate and compare it to the context menu experience of KSP1 and ask ourselves, is this a significant improvement? Do we want to pivot? Is there some other way we think is better to do it? So that's again, I think people are about to learn that we're taking early access very seriously. Our expectation is to get these in front of people, hear what they think about it, recruit them in the process of vetting these choices we've made, and then in some cases, based on that feedback, doing things slightly differently.
I was wondering if this was maybe already done with console players in mind that don't have a right mouse to click and having like a centralized location where they can go through the part actions. In my mind, I thought that was maybe something you guys have thought about when designing it this way.
Well, obviously, we wouldn't have done this in the PC version if we didn't think it also materially improved the gameplay for PC players. But absolutely, when we do move into console, this is probably a system we'll be leveraging fairly heavily.
There's a lot we can learn here. When the developers say they want to use early access to verify design choices and change the game based on the community's feedback, that's not just some marketing play, they really mean it. Those are people like us who have played KSP1 for years and now want to make a sequel worthy of the original. Judging from how Nate describes the implementation of the Parts Manager, it feels to me that this design choice is not undisputed among the team. So yeah, as I mentioned in the previous video, it's up to us to help get this thing to a state where not just the hardcore players can enjoy it, but also those newcomers that Nate talked about earlier. And yes, as I said before, this process can only begin properly when the worst teething problems have been solved. I mentioned multiple times that I believe in the team to get the job done. The first patch will show whether or not my faith in them is warranted. As Nate already suspected a week before the release, they can't complain that they didn't get enough feedback. In addition to all of you, content creators like Scott Manley, Matt Lown, Das from Kerbal Space Academy, EJSA, Jatwa and me, many others have reported dozens of issues in great detail over the past week. What was interesting to learn was that a majority of those were already known to the team, which further reinforces my assumption that developers knew very well that the release state of the game was suboptimal. But all of us, we were able to support the bug hunt by providing additional data points, save files for reproduction, etc. Because with all the myriad of part combinations and ways how to utilize things and fly rockets in KSP2, it's difficult to nail down a root cause for an issue if the bug report doesn't contain any information beyond something doesn't work. Putting all the bugs aside, we know there is still content in the pipeline. I asked Nate which of the elements not yet present he is looking forward to the most.
When you think about what's not yet in the game, what is the thing that you personally really long for, that you're currently missing when you're playing the game?
I mean, colonies, dude. So, you know, I've experienced them. But I can't wait for them to be out. The game is going to change so fundamentally when you are extracting these sort of locally scarce resources that can only be, accessed on remote celestial bodies. And there's a much wider quantity of resources to be detected, extracted, and synthesized. Collecting those resources, moving them to these colonies via delivery routes that you establish by running the digging up and back rover route one time. And then moving those resources between the ground and orbital colonies, and then building new vehicles at those orbital colonies. That will be the day when I think this experience reaches its full blossomed potential. So I can't wait to be able to share that with people. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Seems like the colony aspect of the game is something to look forward to. For me personally, I like to build big ships, so utilizing orbital construction, which colonies will bring to KSP2, will reduce a lot of the pain when trying to throw a gigantic interplanetary or even interstellar spaceship into space. But what I want to leave you with is the final question I asked Nate. Even more so than the words, I want you to listen to the tone of his voice and watch his facial expression. The way he responds to it is, at least to me, confirmation that we have somebody sitting at the helm of KSP2's development that really wants this game to become the best it can be. The next few updates will show whether or not he's surrounded by people who can manifest this into software that is stable and runs well, so that what Nate describes as the happy outcome in a few seconds will come to pass.
How nervous are you for the release of Early Access of KSP2?
It's a good kind of nervous. I would say I'm at a 10. There's hope mixed in there. There's my own vision for what the happy outcome looks like. There's also a kind of show and tell giddiness about it. I've been working on this thing quite a while, and I want to share it. I want people to experience it. So it's a positive feeling for sure.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.